Welcome to the Danger Zone, the Terrible Infant Movies and TV podcast. I'm Will. We have Mike in again.
Hey, how you doing?
Co-host Mike, and Tasha is here again with us.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about Ryan Coogler. So I'm going to do a little, well, and more specifically, I guess. So Tasha had suggested doing an episode about how movies reflect culture, and then I guess also kind of vice versa, like how culture reflects big movies that come out. And I suggested, like, as a more specific topic, something like Ryan Coogler, and we all really like Ryan Coogler. Well, we've had to force Mike to watch Ryan Coogler movies, but Tasha and I both really
I just
like
never
Ryan
got
Coogler.
around to watching his films. I don't dislike him
All
or
three of them.
anything.
Yeah, so many.
Well, like
It's not like it's like Martin Scorsese.
so Fruitvale Station was a smaller indie film, and I didn't really hear about it until later. The other two are big movies, and I tend to not to go to big movie premieres because I don't
So
like.
you don't see small movies, you don't see big movies.
I see 80s
Mike
movies.
loves
baby.
those medium movies.
Those medium movies, and they don't make them as
Those
anymore.
lukewarm ones.
But like, I don't like going to the theater right when big movies come out because it's like so packed and crowded and expensive, and then you have to like sit in the middle of like 80 people, and then you have to crap in the middle, and you can't like. It's just
You can
it's
sit
just
in
a
the front
nightmare.
row.
Yeah, but then you have to crane your head, and then you still have to crap.
Sit on an aisle.
They
I'm
don't
just
let
trying to
you.
help you with your
It's a fire code.
Okay, you don't sit in the
You
aisle.
sit on the aisle
You
seat.
Oh, I
sit
thought you meant sit in the aisle like just a big beast blocking it. I guess I could wear Depends, but it's not worth it to
an
see a
astronaut
movie.
diaper. Okay,
Yeah,
so
anyway, I don't.
I'm just going to
dislike
give,
it.
so just as background, I wrote down a little bit of biographical information about Ryan Coogler, just so we have it in case you don't know who he is. He was born in 1986. He's from Oakland.
So was I.
His mom is a community organizer, and his dad was a juvenile probation counselor. And then he had an uncle. This is on his Wikipedia page. He had an uncle who was a union longshoreman. He played football through high school and then all through undergrad. And he took film classes kind of like when he had time around his football schedule based on the recommendation of a professor who thought he would really respond to film. Obviously, he loved it. He went to USC for grad school. He made some short films that did really well, played at festivals. I think one of them played on HBO for a bit. And then he did, if I'm not mistaken, he did the Sundance Lab for Fruitvale Station.
Oh, okay.
And then they put him in touch with the cinematographer for that film and like kind of helped him put together the crew, basically. So his first film, Fruitvale Station, premiered January 19th of 2013 at Sundance. And it won awards there. It won Audience Award and the Grand Jury Prize. And then it showed at Cannes. And it won the best first feature film there. And then it opened in theaters July 12th. And so the film, if you don't know, is about the shooting of Oscar Grant, who I think was Oscar Grant the third. Was he a third? And he was shot by Metro police officers on the platform of the Fruitvale Station, the BART station in the Bay Area. And then he died at the hospital not long thereafter, and this was in 2009. So the film came out 3 years after he died. And so one of the things that we're going to kind of discuss here is the way in which Ryan Coogler's films, and I would say a very organic way and very natural to who he is, tie into like Zeitgeist moments and how his whole career is almost like this process of building a zeitgeist within American culture. So Fruitvale Station came out July 12th, like I said. July 13th, the next day of the same year, was when George Zimmerman was found not guilty for the shooting of Trayvon Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's a lot of stuff that we can bring up in terms of the cultural context of that movie, but just before we get into that, just to talk about the movie itself, I really, I mean, if I had to pick a favorite Ryan Coogler movie, I'd pick this one, and I love that movie. And I think it's an extremely powerful film, and what he does basically is rather than try to make this kind of inflammatory political movie, he makes a very personal, character-driven movie that makes you love this character despite his flaws. And kind of his whole goal with the film was to, I guess, make anyone who might be in a situation where they're judging someone because of what they see them as rather than who they are, to maybe just stop for a second and think before they take any kind of action against them, which is the kind of what I've read in interviews of him and etc. Does anyone else have anything to say about the movie before we get into the...
What was the whole? Because I haven't seen. Tell me a little bit about like what precipitated the shooting. Did they say they saw something? Like what happened?
There was a fight.
I don't even think Oscar...
He was involved. Yeah, it was like he saw. So the way it's set up in the movie is that he sees some guy on. So it's New Year's it's like the morning of New Year's Day. So it's been New Year's Eve. Everyone has been out partying in San Francisco.
Drinking,
They're going back to the Bay, and he sees this guy on the train that he had previously had an argument with. And that guy starts shouting at him on the train, and there's like some shoving, and like maybe a punch is thrown. I don't remember exactly. And then they all run off at the next station, and the police officers are like on the platform, and they catch Oscar and a few of his friends, and then he's arguing with one of the police officers, and according to the police officer, he thought he was reaching for his taser, but he shot him in the back.
And because he's on the ground, he's like holding him.
He was lying on the ground.
Okay.
But he was, because they were like kind of roughing up his friends, and he was kind of like talking back to the police officer basically, and he got shot. But the movie is like, it's not, I mean, it's like observational, but it's not, it's kind of hard to describe, but I love it.
And it's like his last day, like that's the movie takes place over one day.
Yeah, just like a chronological, and there are some like flashbacks.
Yeah.
Those movies are always hard for me to watch just because you know where it's going, and I know a lot of people like them, and I know it's not so much about that ending, but more about what led up to it and show you the characters. They're just really hard for me to watch because in the back of my mind I know like, man, it's like you almost don't want to like that character because like what's coming and it's going to be bad, and
that's the interesting point in terms about like not wanting to like the character, because real life Oscar Grant, and then obviously in the film he's a very flawed person, but you like him so much, like despite yourself.
He's obviously trying to
be better.
And one of the I actually read some criticisms because I've had discussions with people before, like when it was there was some point at which maybe it was like 2015 or something, publications started putting out lists of like best movies of the century so far, because it's been 15 years or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the reason was. And so I was like talking with friends from film school or other friends who like movies, and what are your favorite movies of the century so far? And I would put this and Inglourious Bastards.
What are some of the other ones that people mention?
It's just like
just a bunch.
The usual nonsense that you think that people would mention.
Avengers.
But I just like the emotional power of this, because I think what he sets out to achieve is emotional impact, and I don't think he could have done that better than he did. And so in that sense, I think it's like a perfect movie. But one of the criticisms I see of it is that people think that the character is not flawed enough. But to me, that's the whole point of the character. It's like you see him getting angry at people. Like you see that he, like there's one scene, and this doesn't spoil anything, but spoiler alert if you don't like any details of your movies told to you.
You already know who dies at the
Yeah, so he sells drugs, right? Yeah. And there's a scene where he has a kid, but are they married or not?
No,
I don't think they're married.
Yeah.
But they live together, and he's like trying to make rent, and he got fired from his job, but he's not telling anyone he was fired from his job because he's like kind of ashamed of it.
Right.
So he has some weed, and he agrees to sell it to this guy in San Francisco, and he goes out to sell it to him, but before the guy shows up, he throws it into either the bay or the ocean. And I think that if you're reading the movie literally, then you could be like, oh, what? Why would you throw away that much money worth of weed? But that's not the point. The point is he's trying to not have to do this anymore. So it's like you can't take every single thing. Like there's a scene with the dog, too. Do you remember that scene where a dog gets hit by a car? Like that's very obviously not supposed to be a literal. He's at a gas station and he sees a dog get hit by a car and he has like a moment with it, and it's very clearly like a metaphor. Like every event in the movie, it's not meant to be read literally, but I think because it has a naturalistic style, people have a tendency to think, oh, this must be a literal movie. Yeah. So, I mean, just to get into do you guys want to talk any more about the movie as the movie, or should we get into the cultural kind of context of it?
I guess I had something to say more about Coogler in terms of, this kind of, I guess, has to do with his like Michael B. Jordan thing that we can go into deeper detail later. But I think that one thing that is special about Coogler as a director is that the performances he's able to pull out of the people in his films and the actors. Like obviously Michael B. Jordan is a great actor on his own, but I really think that going back to the Oscar Grant character as like this flawed character that you root for, he does a really good job of like pulling that out, of like making him this guy that's charming and that someone, I mean, you want to survive, not just because of like this horrible act that happened to them, but because of who they are, and you see that like hope in them in terms of like what they could be and how they could have turned their lives.
It's almost like the thing that I recognize. So that the character actually, it reminds me a little bit of my little brother, in that no matter what he might do to annoy you, you know that he's a good person.
Yeah.
And he's so like charismatic and kind and friendly that even if you see him making a mistake, you know that he's not that person, that it is a mistake. Well, and I think that's like a really important aspect of that character.
And I think we've talked about it before, and it's like, you guys say he's a flawed character, and I'm like, well, that's the kind of characters that most people like because they're more relatable. But like, there's nothing more in a film that I hate when there's like a character who's like perfect, no flaws, because you actually hate that character more than someone with flaws. Like, I know I'm saying, like, obviously you hate the guys that are just like monsters, but the opposite end of it is like, if there's a character with no flaws, like, you know, a comic book character like a Superman, no flaws, perfect. It's like, I hate this guy. There's just,
but then I would argue
to
that
them.
I also really hate characters who have flaws that are very obviously engineered by a screenwriter. Where it's just like
drinking,
it's
the cop that drinks.
It's
like
just generic, and you know, like I feel like this movie is handled so well because you believe that this is a real person, and it's not like this is a flaw for the convenience of making this movie. This is who this guy really is.
I think
because we're all as people flawed. You know what I mean? Like, I think Mike has a different opinion of me than.
But we don't have convenience.
Yeah,
flaws.
I think screenwriters have.
Right.
Well, I think screenwriters have figured out what the character flaws are that people will accept, right? So, like, someone who's drinking a lot, they'll be like, oh, he's going through a hard time or something like this. One instance that I just thought of that did a really good job of having a character with, like, a really bad flaw, but you still kind of feel for them is, the title's escaping from me, but it was, I think, Jackie, it was called Little Children, yeah. And it was Jackie Earle Haley's, I think, first film in his comeback. He plays a character who was convicted and arrested of being a pedophile. And then he comes out and it's about him dealing with it. And he's like one of the main characters. And it's like, it shows him like not wanting to do that. And it's like, that's a flaw that's really hard to accept, but you still kind of like, he's still an interesting character. But like, so like, that's like a flaw that I imagine people would be having a hard time accept versus like, you know, you watch any cop film and chances are the cop is either drinking a lot or is corrupt in some way, and it's like those are almost accepted now. So one quick point that I wanted to make that I made before is about films that like were like that are very like almost historical in a sense, and you know where the ending's coming. It's the same thing like a film like The Perfect Storm or something like that. It's like it's hard for me to watch a film like that and get to know these characters when you know 2 hours later they're just going to disappear in the ocean and all die. And it's like, spoiler alert, I guess, if you haven't seen that movie. But there's like just a lot of films like that, and it's like it's just tough for me to get through that because there's like no surprises. You know?
Well, why do you need to be surprised by a movie? Isn't the point of the movie the experience of it?
Because I would argue, like, not to get too far off topic, but like a film like Argo, where we know what happens at the end, like it's still. I feel like watching that film, I was still so like interested in like the whole aspect or process, or even like a film or the series, the OJ trial, the
People
versus
right?
OJ Simpson, the one that FX did, where it's like we know the outcome, we know what happens, we've all heard that story so many times, but it's like the process leading up to that I think is so interesting.
Yeah. Some people love movies and TV shows like that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So just to like mention the cultural context of this movie a little bit more, because again, we're the way that movies reflect culture and vice versa. So like I said, this came out July of 2013, and then I mean immediately after that is when that whole spate of like Mike Brown was August of 2014 that he was shot. Tamir Rice was November of 2014. Eric Garner was July of 2014. Iselle Ford, who I honestly don't even remember hearing about because it was like right at the same time as Mike Brown.
She was the mom who had her kid with her, right?
That was August 2014. Dontre Hamilton was April 2014. Laquan McDonald was October 2014, and then in 2015 there was Freddie Gray and Sandra Bland, and then Walter Scott, and then the Charleston church shooting was that same year. Mm-hmm. It was one thing that I find really interesting is that Fruitvale Station came out at a time when what it was talking about was happening. Mm-hmm. And it the same year that it came out, 12 Years a Slave came out. Mm-hmm. And as we all know, 12 Years a Slave won the Oscar. And in like the discourse of popular kind of like entertainment media, there was this thing of like 12 Years a Slave it was almost like black movie versus black movie, to use a crass way to explain it, you know what I mean? And so that in 2000, it would have been 2014 when the Oscar nominations were announced for 2013.
Yeah, most likely, yeah.
They could have nominated 10 movies for Best Picture, and they only nominated 9. And Fruitvale Station was not nominated. Some of the movies that were nominated include Philomena, which like whatever. Philomena is fine, but like it's not like a. I don't think anyone's going to be like,
language?
Yeah. Was Nebraska that year?
Oh yeah,
later?
it was. Nebraska was Best Picture nominated.
Yeah, Her.
Oh, Her was.
That's the one.
I hated
Joaquin Phoenix is like in love with this
that movie. But it's not Fruitvale Station, and it didn't even get nominated. And then 12 Years a Slave won the Oscar. And maybe I'm reading too much into this, but to me, it's like this thing of we're dealing with this very awful problem that no one knows how to solve, of this like epidemic of white police officers shooting unarmed black men, especially. And slavery, we can tell ourselves, was so long ago. And we had the Civil War and we ended it, and like this is the cultural narrative that we can create. And so we can look at 12 Years a Slave and be like, well, that's horrible, but that was 150, 200 years ago. And it's like this historical distance that allows people to be like, oh, let's like bestow all these honors upon this film, which I'm not saying that's a bad movie,
right.
But to me it's not nearly as good as Fruitvale, I don't think. And I mean, part of it is that I don't think that 12 Years a Slave has, I mean, if we're talking purely as a movie, I'm not trying to like insult what it's about. It has it's just a series of scenes of brutality, basically. And if that's what Steve McQueen is trying to accomplish, there's nothing wrong with that. But if the Best Picture is the culmination of all the aspects that go into making a movie, if you've read the screenplay for 12 Years a Slave, I don't know if you guys have, no. Steve McQueen threw out like 90% of the screenplay.
Really?
So if there's no screenplay, is it the Best Picture? Like if you take all of these aspects out of it that would traditionally make it like a mainstream film that would win an Oscar, is it the Best Picture?
Yeah, I wonder what.
But to me,
what did they look for exactly? Is it acting? Is it story?
Well, I thought it was the best representation of all of.
I think all of the
things
parts,
that make
acting, story.
And I don't think that was like when I first saw that movie. I saw it at the Aero Theater.
12 years or.
12 Years a Slave, yeah, and I saw Steve McQueen was there, and he was interviewed by John Singleton afterwards, and it was like, yeah, it was a really amazing experience, and I was like, I found the movie to be really powerful, and like I was really overwhelmed by it. But having seen it, I watched it again. There wasn't anything about it, or like having already seen it, where I was like, I need to see this again. Yeah. I stopped watching it after like 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. Whereas I've seen Fruitvale Station like 4 times, and every time I watch that movie, I cry at the end. Even though I feel like not only do I know what's going to happen, I've seen the movie before, and I still find that it moves me. But that, to me, there's like something about how that movie ties into the zeitgeist that almost made it like too uncomfortable of a conversation when it came out.
That's a good job.
I also think there's no.
If you keep feeling for him, even though.
There's also no white saviors in Fruitvale Station, whereas like there is in 12 Years a Slave. Like, you know what I mean? Like these like white people do all these things.
Like Brad Pitt,
but then there's Brad Pitt at the end of 12 Years a Slave.
It doesn't make any sense.
And
I was gonna ask too about Fruitvale Station. I should know this, but you said it went through the Sundance Lab. Do you know like when it was written and like when they started production?
Well, because
Trayvon Martin. It's interesting because Trayvon Martin was 2012. Right?
Yeah, so the movie played at Sundance January 2013. So it must have been 11-12, right? Like,
yeah. Because I'm guessing they spend make the movie in the lab, and then maybe the next year they film and get it ready to go, and then
because Ryan Coogler is from the Bay, he was able to like approach the family about getting the rights, and like they felt comfortable with him handling it. And it was like a whole kind of.
When was the actual?
It's 2009.
2009. Okay. So okay.
The point about the white savior is really interesting. I didn't even think of that. And there is the Brad Pitt. So I don't know if you guys have seen in countries where people have a tendency to be racist, they change movie posters. Mm-hmm. So for instance, with what's the Star Wars movie, The Force Awakens? Yeah. John Boyega, is that his name? Yeah. in China, you can barely see him on the movie poster.
Oh wow!
And but what they basically did was shrink his head from the U.S. version because the arrangement of the poster is the same, but he's just tiny. But there's a poster for 12 Years a Slave. I don't know if it's German or I can't.
I'm guessing Brad Pitt's like.
Brad Pitt is huge, and then Chiwetel is like little, and he's like running or something.
That's almost like the movie. That's almost like the trash movies that they make, where it's like Bruce Willis is in it for like 2 minutes, but he's like featured and it's like starring, and it's like,
But they were in for a real shock when they went to see that film.
Like, wait a minute,
you can start realizing it's like he's not going to be in this movie.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other famous white people in that movie too, like Michael Fassbender, Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah.
I feel like if they made Michael Fassbender front and center, that would put off the wrong image though, since he's like, the slave
No, I know,
guy.
because then it would be like an exploitation movie or something.
Yeah.
It isn't. This is kind of getting off topic of Ryan Coogler, but I read a really interesting review of 12 Years a Slave when it came out that was kind of analyzing all of Steve McQueen's movies and how his fascination seems to be like human bodies. Like Hunger is about people going on hunger strike. Shame is about sex addicts. There's a lot of nudity and stuff in it. 12 Years a Slave is about like this brutality visited upon the body. And so it's almost like he's making these movies where he's taking scripts and these concepts of narrative films, but his interest as a filmmaker is like this almost like visual abstract study of the human body.
Yeah.
And that he just kind of builds narratives around that because you have to in order to make mainstream films.
Yeah.
So that's Fruitvale. Do we have any concluding thoughts on Fruitvale Station? I would just say if you haven't seen the movie, see it as soon as you can. Like I can't say enough good things about that movie. I love it so much. So then Ryan Coogler's next film, released in 2015, November 25th of 2015, was released wide, Creed, which is it's not a reboot, right? It's like
it's a continuation.
Yeah, of the Rocky series.
Yeah, because it doesn't ignore any of the
so in the film, Michael B. Jordan plays the son of Apollo Creed. His name is Adonis Creed, of Apollo Creed from the Rocky movies.
Yeah.
Who was Rocky Balboa's like
opponent? He was the opponent in the first,
and
in the second, and then they became friends. And then in the fourth one,
spoiler alert! If you haven't seen Rocky 30 years later,
he gets killed by Ivan Drago,
Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah,
which I think the sequel has to do with Dolph Lundgren, right? Yeah.
Well, they talk about Dolph Lundgren says, 30 years ago, or however long ago, it's like, you ruined my life. And like, in my mind, I was like, no, he didn't. He beat you in a fight. It's like your fault, right? It's not like he killed your mother and ruined your life, right? He lost in a boxing match. But I think that's kind of like where they're going with the. Well, so
the impression that what I would take away from
Creed
that
2,
is,
not Creed 1.
So in Creed, the Michael B. Jordan, his name is Adonis, right? Adonis Creed, yeah. Adonis. His story is that he is the son of Apollo Creed, but he wasn't raised by Apollo Creed, right? So I kind of understand the notion of you were in my life, not in as much as you killed my dad, but you prevented me from ever knowing him, kind of thing.
Which makes sense because I think, so in like the first and second film, Apollo Creed was sort of like top boxer and he was in his prime. And then the third one, he's kind of like training him. And in the fourth one, he was sort of, this was like his going out. And you would assume that that's about the time when he starts getting more involved and, he settles down a bit. So it's like right when he's about to, actually get to know his dad, he gets, killed in front of everybody,
It's brutal.
In a very brutal way. Yeah.
Russian, right?
But I think we're talking about two instead of one.
So in Creed 1, so the story is, it starts where we see Adonis in like a juvenile detention center, right? And he's like fighting with the other kids. And so one of the hallmarks of Ryan Coogler's style is he likes long takes. And there's a really cool long take in the opening of Creed of like moving through this juvenile detention center and seeing all these kids. And it's a really awesome shot if you're into that kind of thing. So, but to speak about how this ties into the cultural kind of zeitgeist of that time, and we can talk more about the movie too. And it's the Creed is an interesting movie to me because, and we can talk about this with Black Panther especially, but when it was first announced that Ryan Coogler was doing Creed, I was half excited because obviously I watched the Rocky movies growing up, and everyone likes Rocky. Well, most people like Rocky, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with Rocky, I don't think. On the other hand, it's like, having grown up, or I guess like really fallen in love with movies in the 90s, when I think about, Quentin Tarantino, it's like, what if after he had done Reservoir Dogs, he had done a Batman movie, Like, you lose a bit of the potential of someone being like a true giant of like original.
An auteur versus,
I from a cultural standpoint, I understand exactly what Ryan Coogler is doing. Like, let's remake this iconic character and movie, and let's make it about the black character, and let's have like black heroes and black families, and like, instead of just like letting them go make another movie about like whatever, Rocky's son was in Rocky 5, I think, and like, like that kind of movie where you're like, no one needs to see this, and like, and I think he brings something really original to, like, the movie is really about, I think that like as the Rocky movies progressed, they got away from kind of the fabric of, so if you don't know, I was born in Philadelphia. I lived in South Jersey when I was a kid. So the first Rocky movie especially really is about Philadelphia as a city and the people who live there. And I feel that Creed returns to that and is very much, I mean, Adonis is from LA,
right,
but he goes out to Philly to train, to meet Rocky, and he comes to know Philly. And it's almost like the movie is reintroducing us to this city that is really like at the heart of the Rocky movies.
Yeah, it's interesting with the one that the Rocky that sticks out to me is 4, because it was, I forget the year. Was it 82, 84 or something?
Which Rocky movie?
4.
The first one came out in 76, right?
And I think the fourth one was like, they came out pretty quick. They were big hits, so they kept making them right off the bat. But I think the fourth one was right around, the Cold War was ramping up. There was all these tension with Russia, so it really, was culturally relevant at that time as well.
Did you see that in theaters in Russia?
And Rocky 4? No. It came out right when I was born. I don't imagine it would have been a popular movie in the Soviet Union. Especially since Dolph Lundgren he's like the go-to guy to play Russian people, and he's not Russian. He's Swedish, right?
He's Swedish, yeah.
Wow.
So, and his Russian accent's not very good either. He's just the big...
Well, but I would argue that most Americans don't know whether...
Exactly.
I mean, like in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, if you've ever been to Sweden or spoken to Swedish people, Rooney Mara sounds nothing like a Swedish person. But she so thoroughly inhabits that character that it's like, it doesn't really... Like, I mean, to me, what the Zeitgeist that Creed really taps into is the debate that was... And I'll kind of bring up some points and statistics and historical stuff in a second, but... that was really big at that time, which was the idea of representation and diversity in movies, in Hollywood, in storytelling, and what does that really mean in terms of who is telling the stories and who is casting them, etc. So 2 months before Creed came out, that the story happened with, if you guys remember, Matt Damon and Ava DuVernay. Do you guys remember this? On Project Greenlight.
It was Effie Brown.
Oh, it was Effie Brown, was it? Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Oh,
wow,
boy.
getting your black people mixed up.
I know.
We're gonna get
Classic
We're going to
honky.
get some flaming.
I was Googling all this stuff this morning, and I just typed in Matt Damon and Ava DuVernay, and that came up.
Wow.
Even Google's racist.
Wow.
It was Effie Brown. Yeah, and didn't Effie Brown go to...
Delamere.
Yeah.
And
so-
she spoke at Up and West Side of the Frame that year.
Yeah, I couldn't go to that. Yeah. Effie Brown and Matt Damon got in an argument over what diversity and representation in Hollywood means, because she was making the point that you need executives, directors, and producers who are making decisions and telling stories, and Matt Damon was like, you just need to cast to be diverse. But that was a big story when it came out, especially in Hollywood, and what does this really mean for where the industry is going, and that was just 2 months before Creed came out.
Just having the cast is a little silly because the people who actually control it,
right, and that's
directors and executives who
I'm not
create the
defending
stories.
Matt Damon at all. Don't get me wrong, but I think he was thinking from an actor standpoint.
Probably.
He thinks that actors are the center of movies, so I think he was like,
It could because he's an actor and she's more of a director,
on the other
producer,
side.
writer.
I would argue, just standing outside of it, it's ultimately the person with the real power is the person who greenlights the movie, who is the studio executive or the producer. And if no matter who's in the movie, that person is making the final say of which stories you get to see.
That's the whole point. Is their stories is the story is created by whoever is at the top, and they can pick what they tell, and they can pick if they they can easily keep it. The cast however they wanted to. Say they want to make a movie about Russia in the 1960s. So obviously there's not going to be any black people in that movie. And you could be like, well, this isn't a diverse cast, but look at the story, right? Versus let's make Creed, right? Obviously Creed's son's going to be black. So that's how you do that.
And the same month that Creed came out, I found an interview with Spike Lee from the Washington Post talking about the exact thing, same thing we were just talking about. He's talking about how if you want diverse storytellers to be able to articulate their point of view and make diverse movies, people who greenlight movies need to not all be white men, basically. Yeah. And just to give you some idea of like the stuff that was coming out around the same time that Creed was coming out, and like during this whole debate that was happening, 2015, Empire, which to me that feels like a lot longer than 3 years ago when Empire came out.
Oh, it feels like it's been on for a decade.
Like 50 seasons. I know. Empire debuted I think it debuted in January of 2015.
Oh man.
Wow.
Master of None debuted in 2015.
Okay.
Oh wow.
Blackish came out September 2014, so just a couple.
That feels like
before.
it's been on longer too.
Oddly, Master of None doesn't feel like it's been on that long.
Well, no, I know it doesn't because it's only had 2 seasons.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Jeez. So I just looked Empire up. It did come out 2015, but it's already in its 5th season.
Because they split them, right? Woo! So it's like 2 seasons a year. Broad City was 2014, which I remember attracted like a lot of attention for being like women were writing it, directing it, starring in it. I love that show. 2015, Quantico came out, which has Priyanka Chopra as the lead. Sense8 came out 2015, which is just like, if you haven't seen it, just this insane multiracial pansexual like orgy basically.
Yeah, there's an orgy. That's what I heard about.
But not only is there an orgy, it's have you seen the show?
No.
So I love the Wachowskis. And I keep trying to push Mike to let me do a whole podcast about the Wachowskis.
I mean, you can. It'll just be you talking about yourself to yourself.
But it's these 8 people who live all over the world who they're called a cluster, and they're psychically connected to one another, and they all have like the same kind of like psychic mother, basically. It's a little confused. So they can use each other's skills. So like one is a martial arts expert, one is a thief, one is a bus driver, so he's really good with cars, one is an actor, so he's very good at talking his way out of shit. And so they can each tap into each other's skills to help them in different situations. Like one is a hacker.
Yeah.
But there are sex scenes where they can go into each other's bodies, like having sex with each other. And there are like these orgies where there's like every type of person you could imagine. Just like, it's just nuts.
All at once?
So there's one scene where there's like actually an orgy.
Yeah.
But there are other scenes where different characters are having sex and they like interchange kind of like mentally because they can go into each other's heads. So it like becomes this like, and the way it's edited is like an orgy kind of.
It's just funny to me. You said ninja, so you can fight, good skill. Actor, so you can talk, good skill. Hacker, good skill. There's a bus driver. I'm like, can you imagine you're in that cluster and you're the bus driver, and there's all these like scientists and hackers, and you're just some fat bus driver who can drive a car?
Nobody's helpful.
I know, but it's just funny to me, right?
No, but you know what? He'd be your favorite character. You know why? Because he drives a big van. And he calls it Van Damme.
Oh my god!
And there's a painting of Van Damme on it.
That's so good.
But I mean the Wachowski siblings are both trans, and that show has like trans actors in it, and there's a lot of discussion of like LGBTQ rights and stuff like that. And like I would argue that kind of the whole point of that show is to just completely throw away the notion of like binary gender and sexuality, and like everyone is just kind of enmeshed in one another because they're in each other's heads, literally, right? Like they become one another, basically. And that came out same year as Creed. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend came out in 2015. Atlanta came out early 2016. Luke Cage was 2016. Insecure was 2016. And then, so another interesting point, Rogue One.
Complexion Woman.
Did it?
Was 2016?
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, so if you guys haven't seen that, it's a very good play that you should all go check out. Rogue One stars Diego Luna, right, who's Mexican. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but after that movie came out, a woman wrote an essay online about how she went to see that movie with her dad, who's an older Mexican guy, but they live in the U.S., so they're Mexican-American.
Right.
And after the movie, the dad said to her, "Did you notice that guy is Mexican? He sounds like us." She was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "I've never seen that before. Like in a Star Wars movie, I've never seen a guy who has a Mexican accent." And so that became this kind of like talking point for how important it is to have diversity of representation. In fact, obviously we'll talk more about this with Black Panther because that's such a big thing in that movie. Again, that was just a year after Creed came out. And actually also in the same year that Creed came out, Spectre, the James Bond movie, came out, which Daniel Craig said was going to be his last movie. So all the speculation about Idris Elba becoming the next James Bond started then. So there was like this whole campaign to like make James Bond black, right as the Rocky movies shifted to be about like a black central character.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, I could keep talking about this forever because there's some like Straight Outta Compton came out in 2015.
Oh, yeah.
Selma came out December 2014. And then you have the whole whitewashing thing too, right? Which obviously this is like the thing that you could point to as the antidote to whitewashing, right? Where it's like done properly, where you have Exodus came out in 2014, which is Christian Bale and Joel Edgerton playing.
The Noah's Ark thing?
No, Exodus is about the Jewish exodus from Egypt.
Yeah, it's the biblical movie.
And so Joel Edgerton plays the Pharaoh. He's Australian
the
guy.
Egyptian Pharaoh.
And Christian Bale.
Not even close. They couldn't even get someone
who was
from
born
like
in Wales,
Turkey or somewhere.
plays Moses, right?
Oh,
yeah,
Lord.
the Welsh guy playing the Jew.
Oh, and then the excuse was people aren't going to see this film if we don't have these.
Well, the excuse wasn't.
Make that
so
excuse
this
for
is.
any film,
but no one even saw it.
No, of course not.
I think there's this really interesting like double-sided debate that I see a lot when I have like this obsession with reading comments that annoy me on like Facebook and stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's the whole whitewashing thing with, and this movie came out significantly later than these others, so it's not on my list, but Scarlett Johansson movie, Ghost in the Shell.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
So, yeah.
My favorite Asian actress.
And it's a really interesting, that debate is really interesting to me for multiple reasons. One is that the comic that it's based on is, the premise of it essentially is that your body is fake and your consciousness is real. It's like, it's basically the same idea as altered carbon.
Yeah.
And you put the consciousness into the body.
Yeah.
So there was a counter argument that if consciousness doesn't have race, why does it matter what race the character is? The counter argument to that being, it's a Japanese story. Why can't they just be Japanese?
Yeah.
Why does it have to be a white person?
What's also interesting is that it kind of goes back to this thing too with, what was the other movie, Great Wall, where it was like this,
right? Because he's not
Davis.
actually a Chinese
He's
character.
not a Chinese character, but like
with Tom Cruise.
or well, the thing about the Great Wall is that it was a Chinese production company that like did all this. And what was interesting about like Ghost in the Shell is that I remember I have a friend who's like from China, and we were walking out of a restaurant, and there was like the big like Ghost in the Shell poster, and she was like so excited because she like loved Scarlett Johansson, and like we were with a couple of our other friends that were like from China, and they were like, yeah, we love Scarlett Johansson, da 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 da. And so it was interesting about that, and what's interesting about the like in terms of like American audience, Asian Americans have a definitely different experience and viewing experience than like Asians in
It's
Asia.
Well, it's such
like
a different, you know, like, so for instance, and this is getting way off topic, and we can, course correct in a second, but, Akira is like probably the most famous anime film of all time. It's based on a comic book, which is like 2,000 pages long, and it's like this huge kind of cultural milestone, and they've been trying to do a live action American version of it for years, and they don't want to attach a white director to it. But it's like the first name I read that they were trying to get on board was Justin Lin, who is Chinese, not Japanese. It's Chinese American, more so, right?
What else has he done?
He did the Fast and Furious movies, right?
He did a lot. He's a big name right now.
Yeah, he's a great director, but he's not Japanese.
Yeah.
It's like if your point is cultural specificity,
Japanese.
It's more racist to say Chinese and Japanese people are the same.
They got an Asian, so let's just go with it.
Then they wanted Jordan Peele, and they're like, "Well, you're a person of color." It's like he is a person of color in America.
Yeah.
He's not a Japanese person in Japan.
Yeah.
That's a totally different experience. Then they wanted, and I think actually this guy might be attached to it now, the guy who did Thor Ragnarok, who is a Pacific Islander.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, you're from the Pacific. That's
like
close
Taika
enough. Taika Waititi.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like all of them are good directors, but like just don't make the point that we want to hire someone from that culture unless you actually want to, right?
Well, and like if you care about cultural specificity, that like Takashi Miike has made 100 freaking movies. You can't just hire him. Like if you want an experienced director, there you go.
Well, they're afraid like the movie will be about like beheading people and like fucking donkeys and shit. Since that's
I would see that movie so hard.
That's what a lot of his films And I actually like him a lot as a director, but
yeah, his stuff is extremely violent
and weird.
But I mean, there are other Japanese filmmakers.
Obviously, there are.
Yeah. So, The Martian was 2015, same year as Creed. You remember there was the whole thing about there's a character who's Korean in the book who I think was Kristen Wiig in the movie.
Oh, I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah, they didn't change her name.
See,
they kept her as a Korean name?
Well, it's Kim. So it's
okay.
I'm sure that most people watching it thought her first name was Kim.
Right.
But it's
tough for me because a small role a small role like that, it doesn't make sense for me.
No, why does Kristen Wiig need to be how much are you paying Kristen Wiig? If we're talking purely the economics of Hollywood, hire a no-name Korean actor.
I get hiring Scarlett Johansson because there's going to be an audience that are going to watch the movie because of her. But hiring someone in a supporting role to play against type doesn't make any sense because it's not going to make a better movie or save you money or make you money.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Especially in the marketing of the film, it's so marketed around Matt Damon's character that it could have easily.
Yeah, who cares who any of those people are?
It's Matt Damon, right? Yeah. The others, I don't even know why they hired name actors for those. Just save money and hire people straight out of film school. Who cares?
People who can there are so many actors
in that movie too,
who are really good,
who need a big movie
would do
to
it for a lot
out.
less, and who would
really benefit their career to be in a movie.
Speaking
like that.
of the Mara sisters, October 2015, so just a month before Creed Pan came out. You remember that movie where Rooney Mara plays a.
I
think she's Native American.
Yeah, I didn't see it, but I heard about that.
Doctor Strange was 2016, where Tilda Swinton plays, what is the character?
An Asian character.
Yeah, but Tilda Swinton's just like an alien. She's weird looking.
I remember reading some explanation for that, and I can't remember what it was, but there was a whole...
Doctor Strange?
Yeah, there was a whole debate about it.
It's so interesting
Iron
to me
Fist came out around that time, too.
Is that, white people are always quick to make excuses for casting white people in Asian or people of color roles. But if you remember when what was that movie? And we're getting so off topic, but what was the movie, the Jennifer Lawrence one?
Yeah, Hunger Games.
Hunger Games. People made such a big deal that Rue wasn't.
Well, and so what's interesting to me is that
was she supposed to be white or something?
Well, my wife read those books and she's very obviously black in the book. It never says
they
that.
never say her race.
But given the context of where she comes from and everything, it just makes sense.
And people were up
people
in
were
arms.
enraged.
And she was only in the movie, spoiler alert, she dies.
It didn't matter. That's the only Hunger Game I saw.
But the other way, they can just make up every excuse in the book. It's so interesting.
And it's weird because some people get really mad about that, and then other casting decisions they'll just accept. Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury. People love it. They don't really care, and it's in the comics, it's a lot of times a white guy, right?
I don't know. Honestly, I haven't read the.
But but it's they just accept it. It's and I don't know why.
So I think our next project
is such a small role.
I think that our next project should be Denzel Washington as Robert E. Lee.
Yeah.
And we should every person who lives south of the Mason-Dixon line should have to see them by law should have to see that movie.
It would die. It'd be
they would have heart attacks watching it.
It'd be like the Dave Chappelle skit where he's the
black white supremacist.
And when he's revealed, the guy in the audience's head explodes. It'd be like that. Anyway, back to...
Anywho, so two more things that I just want to note in the same year that Creed came out, just to give more on the kind of the zeitgeist context of it, was the Oscars So White thing was that year.
Okay.
And then Aloha on the topic of whitewashing, if you remember. That came out May 2015. Emma Stone plays a character who is...
Oh, yeah,
So the original setup was that she was half Chinese, half Native Hawaiian. Then when they cast Emma Stone, it became, I have a Swedish grandmother. So that 25% of your DNA overtook everything else. Okay.
I do remember that.
What's interesting about the Oscars So White thing also in relation to Creed is that, what's his name? Rocky. God. Sylvester Stallone was nominated for an Oscar for that film, and no one else, nothing else about that film.
I think I'm 100% convinced that the Academy hates Ryan Coogler, and I don't know why. Because
interesting.
Fruitvale Station, as I said, there were 9 nominees that year, and they have 10 spots, and they didn't nominate that movie. And fucking Philomena won. I have no hate against Philomena.
Yeah.
But how many times have we seen that movie? 1,000 times. It's a template movie. So the setup is that Philomena is played by, she's a nun, right? Mm-hmm. She's played by Judi Dench. And when she was a kid, she had or no, I think that she's not a nun. She had a kid, and she was sent to the home in Ireland where the nuns like basically get rid of the kids for women who have kids out of wedlock, and then her kid ends up being a journalist. It's played by Steve Coogan, and tries to find her, and it's a very moving movie, right? Or no, she hires him to find her kid. I think that's the setup.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's just basically she had a kid out of wedlock in Ireland.
She has to find him. Okay.
The Catholics are horrible. People in Ireland are oppressed.
Yeah.
That's basically the setup of the movie. And the performances are amazing. The screenplay is very good. But it's just the type of movie that you see every year when it comes time to start winning awards. And to me, Ryan Coogler makes like exceptional films because he's making movies like Creed, for instance, it's like a blockbuster boxing movie.
Yeah.
But it's very personal. It has a unique aesthetic. It has interesting characters.
I still think,
he makes things his own, and I think it's so hard to do that.
I think because it's only been 3 movies, I actually do think Black Panther is going to be nominated for, right? It's going to be coming up, right?
For this year, yeah.
I think it's going to be
For
nominated.
the popular Oscar?
No,
Well, that's what I was
I
gonna
think
ask
it's
you,
going to be
like,
nominated for more than that. I think it's going to be nominated for quite a few. And it's hard because
Well,
like you can look
the
at
technical nominations.
Well, I was going to
right?
ask you because you think that they hate
I think
him.
Michael B. Jordan's going to be nominated for Best Supporting.
Do you think that they
And he might win.
created that category for...
Yeah,
because... Interesting.
And it's tough
just
because the
all gonna
Oscars
be-
are always like this because like
it's all going to be the non-white people
Yeah.
movies, the popular movies.
it's like how many movies did like Scorsese make before he won an Oscar? And it's like there's
Yeah, but he
there
got
may be-
nominated.
Yeah, but like not that much, I don't think.
And
He got, but
John Singleton was
think about the
I'm
fact
sure
that,
there's always something
but he
about
was
people that
making
people hate.
Scorsese was making like Roger Corman movies in the 60s and 70s, and then he made Taxi Driver and he got nominated. Whereas Ryan Coogler's first movie was like his, I don't want to say his Taxi Driver, but it was like he announced his voice immediately upon arrival. And like Coppola, Spielberg, like a lot of those guys were making like low budget, or like Spielberg made Duel for TV, didn't he?
Yeah.
And Coppola was making these movies that no one has ever heard of until he made The Godfather.
I do think the Academy has a thing against like younger people.
And people who make movies that are not about that are about youth culture, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, I don't get it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Like,
just Star is Born is going to be nominated for like 8 Oscars.
Yeah,
and
'cause
it's like the same
the
movie you've
fourth
seen
time
a
it's
million
been
times.
made. I think. Well, no, I'll talk about my stars.
But I do
later.
think there are certain people that, and it could be race related, it could be something else that the Oscars just don't like. And it could be whether they don't let them win or they don't nominate them. There are certain people like Leonardo DiCaprio was nominated so many times and he didn't win, and it's like, what is it? I wish you knew. Like, I'm sure there's some, or there's certain
there are
voters
people
that,
they love too, right?
Yeah, there are
but
people
part of
they
it is
love.
that
Like Meryl Streep.
we don't know
Tom
who the
Hanks.
voters
Tom Hanks,
are.
Black, I get it. Yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
So we don't. So like, for instance, and this is maybe a controversial topic, but like Roman Polanski, right?
Mm-hmm.
They love Roman Polanski. He won for The Pianist, right? Didn't he? Even though he wasn't even there.
I think so.
Well, he can't be there because
No, I know, but
Yeah.
what I'm saying is Roman Polanski is in his 90s at this point, 80s, and they say that the makeup of Academy voters is older. Right?
Would agree.
And that they're predominantly white. So if it's older white people, we could make the assumption that most of them are descended from immigrants from parts of Europe that are not dissimilar from where Roman Polanski is from.
Yeah, he won for The Pianist.
Right? Right, exactly. So it's
2003.
this sense of like, he's one of us.
Interesting.
And like, let's circle the wagons.
He's a weird case
I
because
wonder the
even if he is like
correlation-
one of them, he's still
I want to know the
shouldn't be winning
correlation.
it.
No,
More.
but that's what I'm saying. But they love him, and like
love him.
you, objectively speaking, if you want to throw away all the horrible things that we can say about Roman Polanski, he makes great fucking movies.
Yeah, he does.
But he's still Roman Polanski,
Yep.
right? So like,
I'm interested to know the correlation between old white Academy voters and like Trump voters. Like, it's so interesting.
well, have you heard the story about how one of the ways that Harvey Weinstein used to run his his campaigns, like promotional campaigns for the Oscars, and I think Shakespeare in Love in particular, because that was the one where they had the big upset, right, against Saving Private Ryan, was he went to, there are like, in Florida, I'm not making this up, in Florida, there are retirement areas where industry people go. And he went there with screeners and was like giving them out to people. And it's like they're that old. It's not like they're in their 60s. They're like old.
I'm guessing that's one of the reasons they don't want to reveal who the voters are for just stuff like that. It's embarrassing. Well, the stuff like that's going to happen too. Like it's almost going to be like you're going to start lobbying them and like.
Well, I'm sure Harvey Weinstein bought a list of names off of someone or like.
I feel like they should. Like if you're any of the unions should have a vote.
But I feel like your taste is. I mean, like if you think about music, right? Like the music that I love the most is music that I fell in love with when I was young. Yeah. Right. No matter how much I think something recent is amazing, it won't have the same emotional impact on me as something that. So if Roman Polanski, for instance, is making a movie like The Pianist that reminds you of like the grand war films that you saw when you were a kid, you're going to vote for those movies. Yeah. Right. And that's why I think you need not just diversity of like ethnicity and background and nationality and all these things, but also a wide age range. Yeah. Well, so that it truly represents the people, because it's supposed to be. And then people, I don't know if like, this is not something I think that's like explicitly stated because they're trying, like they want the Oscars to be a big event for the public to rally around, but it really is just people who work in the industry giving each other awards because they think they did a good job. It's like a trade show. So like if that's the case, the entire industry should be and everyone who makes movies should be represented.
That's what I was saying. That anyone and I mean you can't.
Yeah, but it should be an age range too because there is this sense of like graduating people.
They're generally younger, or at least they're actively working, so they're a little more connected to what's going on and what the current trends are. So anyone in like the PGA, WGA, Actors Guilds, all those people, because you're right, they are just giving each other awards. So let the people who are working in the industry just give each other awards. I mean, the viewership on those shows is going way down because I think people like us who really don't care about the awards too much. Like you said, you love Fruitvale Station. It wasn't nominated for an Oscar, so it's like. Why am I going to watch 4-hour Oscars when they don't even nominate the film?
I also think
it happens a lot.
In this day and age, we're also tired of seeing like elites congratulate elite. Like, yes, we work in the industry.
Yeah, it's always annoying.
You don't want to see like super rich people being like, "Congratulations on being even more rich."
And then they preach and then they talk about all this stuff, and it's like, dude, you're like a billionaire. Yeah. Leave me alone. I'm going to eat my McDonald's.
The other thing that's interesting to me is like. It's this really interesting mix of like I really like watching Oscar speeches on YouTube, and I watched Forrest Whitaker's recently for Last King of Scotland.
You watched that recently? Or
I watched his speech.
Okay, recently.
And it was very moving. He's like, I was born in West Texas. I grew up in Compton and Carson, and like just being an actor didn't seem real to me. But then to get a role in a movie, and then to be able to act in movies my whole life, and then to win an award like this.
Yeah.
And then, I remember I think it was last year. When was Manchester by the Sea? Like 2 years ago?
Either last year or the year before.
And that was a quote-unquote Amazon movie. Actually, Amazon bought that movie at Sundance. They didn't produce that movie, right? And you see fucking Jeff Bezos sitting there in the audience, like he has anything to do with any art that anyone's ever created in the history of the fucking universe, and you want to like shoot yourself. And it's like, but it really is this like thing of like there are people who are in the industry who deserve to be recognized in a public space and should be allowed to be able to say, like Forrest Whitaker was able to say, this really does mean something to me. But then you're like, why do we have to watch these fucking billionaires jerking each other off for like 4 hours?
Yep. And it's tough, and I think, the ratings are going down and people start caring until they shorten it, I think that's one of the reasons they introduced this popular category, because like they're trying to appeal to this demographic of young people who are going to watch Avengers and then they're like, oh, why isn't Avengers nominated? It's my favorite film.
I'm sure that the popular category is actually just the category that Disney paid for.
It's going to be superhero movies, basically.
But the point that I meant to make when I went off on that rant was that I think that there's like this fissure in, there are people like who you're talking about who are like, I love the Avengers, I love whatever big movies, and then my movies are not nominated. And then you have pretentious people like me who would maybe traditionally watch the Oscars, except that like now I find that like the older I get, the more I find that the movies I find interesting in the moment are not recognized. They're recognized 10 years later or something like that. You know what I mean? And so I'm not interested in it. So who you actually appeal to is like a very small group of people
that you're appealing to.
It's like people who like prestige films who don't care that popular stuff isn't there, who don't care that the really progressive stuff is not there. It's like a very narrow lane.
There's like almost a new category of film called prestige Oscar winners or pictures, and they're made solely to win awards.
They all come out at the same time.
They all come out at the same time.
Yeah.
So like you said,
it's funny because now they're all starting to overlap. Like we have two transformers or transformers or like gay transversion therapy films.
Is there?
They're like two.
I knew about the Joel Edgerton one. What's the other one?
The other one with what's his name? The kid he was in Manchester by the Sea. He was in Lady Bird.
I thought that was the Joel Edgerton.
Oh, maybe that is. So maybe it's that one. And then I'm thinking Boy Erased and the other one with that kid about like drug addiction. Like there's like some movies about drug addictions coming out. Like they're all starting to like overlap on each other
because they want to compete for that Oscar.
Well, it's like Volcano and Dante's Inferno, right?
Yeah,
came out the same year. Or what are the meteorite ones? Remember there was Armageddon and Deep Impact.
Oh, I didn't know
it happens all the time.
The same year as
but it's like now it's like
Jurassic Park and Schindler's List.
Does it make more sense to make a movie like that or just make a fun movie that people can enjoy?
Well, and there's so much elitism that goes into the decision-making process of what constitutes a movie that deserves awards, because comedies are very rarely mentioned, but like, I would argue that the script for a movie like Kind Hearts and Coronets or a Marx Brothers movie is way more innovative and interesting than like a script for, like Argo won Best Screenplay, right?
Yeah. I liked Argo though.
I don't dislike Argo, but the thing that I liked the least about it was the scripts, because if you know, so this is for the audience, if you're just watching movies, you haven't studied them, right? Argo is a perfectly fine, entertaining film. But Tasha and I both studied screenwriting in grad school, and basically the template that you get taught, if you went to the school that we went to, that it was originated at USC, right? Is that there's 3 acts, and within each act there are sequences, and then scenes within sequences, and you hit certain beats at certain times, whatever. Like Argo hits every single beat exactly where it should. And so to me, as soon as an event happens, I know the next 15 minutes of the movie.
I see.
And so clinically it's perfect, but I find it to be boring.
Right.
Because it's
clinically perfect, and that's not a fun movie. Right? You want a movie where it's like something new's happening, something unique or surprising or interesting. You don't want a movie that's by the books. That's like watching a police procedural TV show. Here's the crime. Here's the guy you think did it. No, there's the twist, resolution. It's like every single one is the same. And I think they're made that way because people get accustomed to movies like that, and they almost feel like that's the safe option. Like, I like seeing those kind of movies. I'm going to go see this movie, and I know I'm going to enjoy it because I like these kind of movies, versus trying something new and then like getting halfway through the film and realizing you hate it. But so like most people just don't take a chance. So like, it's the same thing for us. It's like I like Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, so I'm going to watch a lot of Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. But I don't know how that has to do with Ryan Coogler.
We don't need to talk about Black Panther. Let's just stop there.
I think the next Ryan Coogler movie should be...
Oh, isn't he doing Black Panther too?
Well, but it should be Commando 2, starring the girl who's the hero now and an old Schwarzenegger.
Isn't the woman in that Alyssa Milano?
Yeah, so everyone would hate that movie.
Why?
Because they would.
She was at the Kavanaugh hearings, right? Yeah. She's still famous.
She was like staring at him.
I was going to ask...
She was glaring.
I know that he had a writing credit on Black Panther.
Schwarzenegger?
No.
I think Ryan Coogler. I thought he had co-writing credit on all
of films. That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, because if I understand correctly, when he was at USC, he did production, but he did. I think he did the Sundance Lab. He did for writing because he got permission from Oscar Grant's family to make that movie, and I think he wanted to tell the story himself.
Yeah.
So he kind of went about writing the script, but then I think was put with a writing partner. I don't remember exactly whether he wrote it or not, but I know that he got help through the lab.
Okay.
And then I think the story is that somehow Forrest Whitaker became, because he helped produce that movie.
Yeah.
And he got Octavia Spencer involved, I think, because he knows her. Because she plays his mom.
Right.
So I think Forrest Whitaker's on the board at Film Independent, so he may have something to do with the Sundance Labs, possibly, or something.
So we all went through Film Independent Labs, and as you learn in Film Independent Labs, they're very interconnected with Sundance
Yeah.
Labs. Like people
And
get
I know he's
shuffled
on the
from one
board,
to the
so-
other a lot.
So I'm guessing he had some involvement, or it just came across, the script came across and he saw it and he liked it or something.
I will
like
say
that.
Ryan Coogler is one of the few directors that I like. I don't usually like director writers
Oh my god! At all?
at all. I can always
Like
tell.
none of them? Not even like Coppola?
I can always tell
God, she hates the
Coppola.
when
Godfather.
a director
Oh, I
has
thought you
written
were
a
talking about the
film.
one-
Like I can always
What
like
about
watching a film.
Tarantino?
I'm always like, yeah, but this is.
So I understand why people hate Tarantino. Well, no, I don't.
I like Tarantino. Actually, I'll give him.
I understand why people who don't know what they're talking about hate Tarantino. But you said you like him, so I'm not
I
offending
like it,
you.
yeah.
But I'm saying when, like, if you don't understand, like, if you haven't, I'm going to sound pretentious when I say this, but I feel like if you haven't studied the nuances of what goes into making a film, if you don't understand how screenplays are constructed, how films are made, and how you direct actors, like all of these different things, you could just look at Tarantino and be like, oh, he stole this scene from this person, and it's all just cursing and but I think if you understand what goes into making a film, and if you can understand what he's doing as a filmmaker, if you don't, I understand how subjectively you don't like him. But if you don't think he's good at what he does, I think you're a fucking idiot.
Yeah. It's
So
tough
you
for me
sound
when-
like the people who defend Kubrick. There.
Oh!
You made a turn.
But yeah, I hate when people say like so and so isn't good or whatever. It's like just say you don't like his films, which a lot of people probably don't like Tarantino films, but he's obviously good at what he does.
Come on, Glorious Bastards is one of the best movies ever. Anyway,
It's not as
but
good
you
as
say you
Street
don't
Fighter.
like The Godfather?
I like The Godfather. Okay, I said few. I like The Godfather.
Do you hate David O. Russell?
Street Fighter.
I liked Silver Linings Playbook. I didn't like his. What was the other one?
American Hustle. Well, what about like Three Kings, The Fighter?
I
Three
saw
Kings
The
was good,
Fighter.
and
I
The
didn't really
Fighter
like
was
The
good.
Fighter. I fell asleep during The
Did
Fighter.
he write The Fighter? He didn't write The Fighter, did he?
Maybe he didn't. No, because it was written
Does he
before
write
he came
anything?
on. David O. Russell?
Yeah, what's he
Yeah.
write? He wrote...
Well, he co-wrote. So John Ridley, I think. Didn't John Ridley write the first draft of Three Kings?
I don't know.
And then David O. Russell got it and rewrote it. He co-wrote Huckabees. I thought he wrote Silver Linings Playbook. He adapted it from the book.
He did, yeah.
I'm not the biggest fan of his, so I have no idea.
What about Boogie Nights?
I haven't seen Boogie Nights. Oh.
Oh my god. This is the second person in like a week who said that. That
So
movie's like
for all
a
of you who don't
religion
know,
to me.
yeah,
Write it
that's like
down.
one of Will's favorite films.
I should have watched it before
Oh
coming
my
onto the
God.
podcast.
No, it's okay.
Every night he stands in front of a mirror and says he's Dirk Diggler.
But I could see how if you was when did that come out in 1997? So
Yeah.
how old were you in
7.
1997? Yeah,
Yeah.
so like I
been a
get
while,
that.
man.
Like there are movies from like the whatever I was 7 in 1990.
There's just weird
There are movies from
stuff.
1990 that I haven't seen. Like I guess I get it. Yeah, but
There is that like weird time frame of when you're born where you just don't see those movies, and a lot of people don't go back and watch those
They're
movies.
like adult movies.
Like if you ask, I bet you if you ask
I've seen a
anyone,
lot of adult movies.
anyone born 2000 or beyond, I would say 90% of them have not seen like The Godfather or.
Well, now that The
any of those.
Godfather's on Netflix, maybe they have.
Maybe, but I would say for them, because they don't watch movies
3-hour
like that,
movie,
it
though,
wouldn't
yeah.
even pop up in their recommendations.
They just watch Stranger Things for the 17th time.
Nope.
I haven't even seen all the 80s movies that Stranger Things is based on.
Nope. They're like, oh, this is very creative and
This is
innovative.
new. I've never seen this before.
Yeah. So should we get to Black Panther?
I've never heard a synthesizer before. Yeah, so released February 16th, 2018. Did anyone see it for Valentine's Day?
No.
I saw it on the day of, yeah.
Did you? Yeah. Black Panther, which, so in the previous podcast that we did with Tasha, I mentioned not having seen this movie. I have not seen it. I watched it a couple weeks ago. I mean, where do you even start with this movie? It made $1.35 billion. I wrote down
Ton of money.
$700 million in the U.S. alone.
Ton of money.
So I think we can label that as a cultural phenomenon, right? Like, I mean, so we're...
It was in theaters for a while, and it was doing really well for like a long stretch. It was like a Titanic sort of thing.
I went for Halloween. I went to Santa Monica because I have a friend who lives there, and every year she invites me because she said it's like her neighborhood is just insane at Halloween. Mm-hmm. And now that I have a kid, I was finally like, okay, I should go. Right?
Yeah.
So I went and I brought my son, and I saw so many white kids dressed as Black Panther for Halloween.
I love that.
And that was really cool to me because I'm going to tell like a little personal story now, but like I remember very specifically the first time I met a racist person. And when I was a kid, So I lived outside of Philadelphia, like I said. I saw this Philadelphia 76ers with Charles Barkley play Michael Jordan on the Bulls. And I was like 6 maybe. And I like fell in love with Michael Jordan. He was like my hero. And there was this kid I went to summer camp with a couple years later who was also a big basketball fan. And he said something racist, like at some point. And my mind like couldn't process that this guy was like I'm like, but you like, because I looked up to Michael Jordan and I wanted to like be like Michael Jordan. And I was like, how can you be racist if you're a basketball fan? Like, it doesn't even make sense.
It does not make sense.
So to me, like the like it's so important to have like white kids dressing as Black Panther. Because they're just like fundamentally don't understand. Like, if you're willing to do that, how can you fundamentally understand the concept of racism if those are your heroes? Right. I think that's such an important thing. And it was really cool to see. Yeah. I mean, where do we even want to start with this movie?
Also, it's interesting too. What was it, Saudi Arabia or somewhere, where like they had put a ban on movies and they were like lifted the ban for Black Panther. Yeah.
I will say, if you said they banned Black Panther, I'd be like, that's weird. I know they would ban like Israeli
movies. I know they wanted driving.
I know. Well, they wanted to ban Wonder Woman because Gal Gadot. And I think they did actually. Even though it has nothing to do with like politics.
She's also not wearing a hijab in the movie.
Yeah, that doesn't help too.
You can see her hair.
But
though maybe because the women of Black Panther are bald in some parts, right?
Maybe
they're like, okay, well they don't need a hijab if they don't have any hair. The sister has hair, right?
She does.
And Lupita.
It's very short.
I think everyone has hair except the
warrior
and her warrior. Right? I think they're like the Secret Service.
Angela
I think
Bassett has hair.
They protect the king, and I think that's like his royal guard. I'm guessing it's like a cultural thing or like a significant thing that.
Well, so I actually read that I read a whole article about the costumes and hair for Black Panther, and they had 3 reference points. It was Kenya, South Africa, and Namibia. So all the hairstyles and costumes were based on things from those cultures.
And I think that's like what I remember when the film was playing. A lot of people were talking about the costumes, the authenticity of it, the stories of it, more so than just like what happens in the movie.
Well, because if you accept the movie from its cultural context, I would argue that my favorite. I'm not a big Marvel movie fan. My favorite is probably the first Iron Man. In part because I saw it with no context. I'm just like, this is a fun movie.
Yeah, I didn't like the first Iron Man.
But you liked the third one.
Did you see it first, or did you see other?
Oh, I saw it first. Yeah, I saw that was the.
Tasha
but I only watched. I'll be completely
Man.
honest. I only watched 30 minutes of it. I was like, I can't deal with this. So
did you see it in theaters or like?
No, I watched it at a friend's house.
Are you a big Marvel fan or not really?
But did
I like the Avengers films. I'm not a big fan of like the individual films.
Okay.
But I would say after the first Iron Man, Black Panther is probably my favorite. I saw the first Avengers and I liked it in theaters, and then I watched it on Netflix and I was like, this movie is fucking horrible. It's horrible.
None of the movies hold up.
It's not just that it doesn't hold up, but like it is fucking awful. Yeah. And there's a really interesting video that you can see, and I digress, but where they like it's a guy who does video essays on like the history of cinema. Basically, I forget his name, but he compares camera movement in Seven Samurai to camera movement in the Avengers.
Yeah, but that's a stupid comparison, though. That's stupid, though.
But it's literally Nick Fury and no, it's not though. They're both big movies.
It's a dumb comparison.
It's like, well, but his point is that cinema. If you look at someone like Kurosawa, they are inherently telling a visual story, whereas someone like Joss Whedon is writing a story, and then they have to figure out how to put a camera around it, right? So it's almost like a staged comic book or play or something like that.
Well, going back to what we were talking about earlier, and this ties into Ryan Coogler and why I like him so much as a director that writes, is one of those things that I hate with. I think that a lot of directors play more. And I get it. They play more to like the visual side of a film. So there are a lot of times you see a film and there'll be like these super long takes and you're just kind of like, what the fuck? Like, let's move on. Like, this doesn't add anything to the story. Like, this doesn't add anything to the character. But I think what's interesting about Ryan Coogler and like what you were saying, like how he likes to do a lot of like long shots, it always adds to the story. And I think like him, and I think another director writer that does that is Wong Kar-wai, where you like see his films and like these long takes, but they don't take away from the story. They add to the story. They add to the feeling
or like
of the
someone like
story.
Sergio Leone.
I feel like Alfonso Cuarón,
he likes them too. Yeah.
I would argue that. So when you mentioned the Ryan Coogler's long takes, that first shot in Creed to me, it gives you the entire context of that character's childhood, because you go through his environment and you see all the facets of it, right? And to me that, so like if you listen to Alfonso Cuarón talk about his movies, like with children and men in particular, he did the long takes and also very like carefully arranged the distance between the character and the camera to show the environment, so that you have an unbroken understanding of the relationship between person and space.
Right.
And that, I think Ryan Coogler does that really well, even if he's editing and not doing long takes. I think he's very good at contextualizing characters in space, whereas I find that a lot of Marvel movies, like Mike and I saw Guardians of the Galaxy recently. I've seen that before, but we rewatched it recently. And that movie moves around a lot, and it's got a lot of settings that are ostensibly really interesting. Like there's that one scene where they're at like a space station that's in like the head of an ancient being, like an ancient giant celestial being. And I don't remember anything about it at all. Like I don't, like it's so like visually anonymous, and there's no concept of like each of the groups of people in Wakanda have a unique like visual language that is attached to them that helps you understand them, and that you see them in their context, and then you see them in the greater context of the whole country, and it all makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, that was done really well in it, and it did feel like at first when I was watching the film, it felt, you know, this is like a small place and they're all there, but then like as you keep going in the film, it's like this really wide open space, and you have these like tribes, and they're all have their own customs, their own look to them, and like, you know, what they're known for, and that was all done very well as well. But I always wonder with a film like that, even when you get someone like Ryan Coogler, how much control does he have, and how much does Marvel say, you can do this, but we need this spaceship flying here, you got to shoot it down, and it's got to be a big explosion. Like, how much of that is Marvel? So he supposedly,
because
there's no way they gave him cut.
Because the first person they approached about this movie was Ava DuVernay / Effie Brown. Yeah. If you're a racist white person like me,
fatty.
And they either had a disagreement or she didn't want to do it or something. And so they approached Ryan Coogler, and there's an interview with him. I think it was an interview or something that he wrote, where basically his stipulation for working with them was, when I watch Marvel movies, they all look exactly the same. Like they're edited the same way, they're written the same way, they're shot the same way. You have to let me make my movie, or I don't want to do this. Of course, you have to work within the confines of Mark and Kevin Feige. Yeah. So if you don't know, Kevin Feige or whatever his name is kind of like the executive.
He's as powerful as any person in Hollywood right now.
Yeah, so he makes all the decisions essentially for Marvel Universe.
Yeah,
so you do have to. I'm assuming you have to abide by what he tells you. But I think that Marvel, and from what I read in the quotes from
sounds like they wanted to try something new.
Well, and they also really wanted to do this movie right, I think, and because it's
I think Black Panther is supposed to be like one of the main people in like the next phase of theirs.
A bit of inside information.
Oh, well, here we go. You heard it here first. Let's go.
She just got a text. I think it was from Ryan Coogler. Ryan, we're talking about you on this podcast. What should we say?
No. I spoke with one of the execs. He came to speak to us in another fellowship I was in, and he was saying that like he was an exec on the film. He works at Marvel. And he said that they like gave them. It was that thing like, obviously, like, work with us, but they gave him complete control of everything. There were a lot of things that they were worried that they were going to intervene on in terms of, like, is it, like, too black or, like, is it too specific, like, the outside world won't get? And Marvel was, like, didn't say anything a lot of the times. Like, they just let them have
That's cool.
free range over it.
And I wonder if his past two films, being as good as they were, had, you know,
definitely
made him, they're like, all right, he knows what he's doing. We don't have to worry too much. Versus, like, if they're like, Mike, come direct Black Panther, I'd be like, all right. They'd be like,
it's set in Moscow.
Yeah, it's in Moscow, starring Dolph Lundgren.
And the whole movie takes place in the parking lot of a McDonald's.
Basically. It's a great film. Copyrighted.
So, I mean, there's so much to talk about with this movie. So, I mean, just in terms of its cultural impact. So I was reading that, this is really interesting to me, Hasbro, the toy company, predicted that Black Panther toys and costumes would be huge sellers, but the retailers that Hasbro worked with weren't convinced. And so they wouldn't let Hasbro put into stores the amount of merchandise that they had made. And then people started coming and buying it all. And they were like, oh shit, we need more. And Hasbro's like, well, we got it. Like, we knew this was going to happen. Nice. But so I read a quote from a merchant, like an anonymous merchant or licensing executive who was interviewed about Black Panther. And she said, we don't see this happening a lot for a film to blow up that much. Speaking in the context of, this is not Hulk, right? This is like, it's not Batman. It's like a character that most people probably didn't know before this movie came out. And the prediction was that in 2018, Black Panther would do $250 million worth of merchandising sales. Wow, which is like, that would be a profit on like a normal, I mean, I know this movie had a huge budget, but like on a smaller budgeted movie, that would be a really decent profit, like in and of itself.
The merch,
just from the merchandising.
That's insane.
Wakanda. So this is a funny personal story. I actually have cousins in Illinois who live in a town called Wakanda, and they got their high school got a petition to change their mascot to the Black Panther. Then like tens of thousands of people signed online.
Did they do it?
I honestly don't. I didn't hear the final verdict, but it's spelled differently. But it's pronounced the same.
Sorry, the mascot at my high school was the Panthers.
Really? Yeah,
not the Black Panthers, but they're obviously
Panthers,
black because they're Panthers. They're all black.
Lexus made a Black Panther inspired coupe. I didn't know that. Did you guys know that? I just read about that today as I was researching this.
I bet they gave one to Ryan Coogler.
Yeah. And so something that we should talk about that Tasha and I were talking about, I think before we started filming this, is the contrast between the Chadwick Boseman character, who is Black Panther, right, and the Michael B. Jordan character. And so something I'll say before I can let Tasha talk about. I have a very good friend who's Ethiopian, and when he saw this movie, and I think I've mentioned this before in another podcast, he was like, "Oh, this is the story of Ethiopia," because Ethiopia has never been colonized or conquered by anyone, and I think that ties into the Ethiopian mentality. And if we see the Chadwick Boseman character, he is. He's very like self-possessed, dignified, and he's like very obviously the product of a royal line that has been unbroken for an extremely long time, right? Whereas the Michael B. Jordan character is very clearly the product of what it means to be. I mean, he's from Oakland, right? Didn't he grow up in Oakland? To have grown up in that environment, and he has that line, spoiler alert, of what he said, I'd rather be dead like my ancestors
who killed themselves for jumping off,
who jumped off the ships before, which is just like, that line was like,
that made me cry when
that was like, holy shit. And I actually knew that line was coming because my brother saw that movie with his son and texted me about it, and I had forgotten, and then I saw it, and I was like, man, that's like, it gets you. But that character is so good because he's not like, you can't, it's impossible for you to look at him just as like this maniacal, like James Bond style movie villain who just has a crazy plan.
Right. Everyone looks so black.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Well, I talk so much that I try to stop myself so other people can talk. But I can keep going.
I'm giving Tasha a chance to talk.
No, keep going.
I just like,
I lost my train of thought.
Sorry. Well, so here's something like, I don't know if this is interesting. This is interesting to me. So I have I keep talking about my friends. I have a friend who works for Will Smith. And Will Smith doesn't want to do movies where they present the only solution to problems is violence. So Will Smith was going to be in Django Unchained. And he really wanted the end of that movie to be their relationship. They meet each other, they fall back in love, and they escape. He didn't want to do the whole final act of like all the violence and stuff. Obviously, that's what Tarantino wanted to do, so he wasn't in it. And when I think about Black Panther, and I think of if I'm thinking of the Will Smith mentality, I almost it's really tragic that character dies, because yes, he makes his own decisions, but he's never given a chance in life, right? And like that to me is inherently more tragic than the idea that like, what if the Chadwick Boseman character, I guess I should just keep calling him Black Panther. What if Black Panther can show him what it's like to not have to be that angry all the time.
Right.
Or that bitter. And like he can welcome him into Wakanda, and instead of killing him, they can show him what their way of life is like. And what it means to not be him, I guess. Right. But then I guess I wonder if it's inevitable that he's going to die because of who he is. And that's because the tragedy of that's the tragedy of the character.
If he would have got, found out when he was young and brought over, probably would have been fine. But at that point, it's probably just
that's just the more I think about it, the sadder I get about that character and his whole...
It's tragic from the start.
It's really sad. And to make him the villain is really interesting because it's like he can be the protagonist of his own movie. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what makes a good villain, right?
Yeah.
I think that's why people liked... I think we were talking about this, how the Killmonger character was way more interesting... I guess in just our opinion, my opinion, than the Black Panther character,
because he's not dynamic, right?
Yeah, compared to honestly compared to like a lot of the other characters in the film, I feel like there are more characters in the film. I love T'Challa, I love Black Panther, but I think there are other characters in the film who are more interesting.
But Chadwick Boseman also played Jackie Robinson, and one of the criticisms of that movie was he's not dynamic. He's too good of a person.
Oh, well, that's because in the Jackie Robinson film, like, his wife
had control over
there was like, they
right?
wanted to make a mistake. It's like, that doesn't make an interesting film.
But it is, like, I feel like if I were casting that movie and I knew who the T'Challa character was and I had just seen the Jackie Robinson movie, I'd be like, that guy's perfect for this movie.
You would have been like...
Yeah, because he's really, really good at playing that character.
It almost feels like, though, also, because this is the first time we saw Michael B. Jordan's character versus... We already saw Black Panther in Captain America: Civil War.
Spoiler alert!
Spoiler alert!
I haven't seen that movie.
And almost like I felt Black Panther in Black Panther did not have much of an arc. He was the same character in the beginning versus the end. He had more of an arc in Captain America because he was all out for revenge, and then he learned the truth, and he kind of
So does Captain America take place before this movie?
Yeah, Captain America takes place when
his dad died.
In Captain America.
That's what happens in the
spoiler
explosion.
Alert. And then he spends most of the film getting revenge, and he realizes the guy who set it all up was also basically trying to break the Avengers apart because they're responsible for his parents.
That's not Andy Serkis, is it?
No.
Okay, so this is a tangent, but the guy who plays his dad, and this is one of the things that I think is really interesting about Black Panther, is John Kani, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Kani, who is a South African playwright and an actor, and he helped teach them the language that they speak in the film. And I think they obviously I think this is very atypical of your traditional big budget Hollywood tentpole movie. They really went out of their way to make sure that this film incorporated as many organic, meaningful cultural elements as they could bring into it.
Well, I heard that some of the accents, the accents were different, and some were specific to South African, and some were specific to West African accent in terms of just the characters. And I don't think that's something that I'm as an American, but in Black, I wouldn't have you know what I mean?
Yeah.
As someone who I think as a Black person, I know the difference, that sounds bad, but I would know someone, if I met someone who's African and grew up African, even if they if they were born here but their family's from Africa, I think I would be able to tell the difference versus someone no offense, but Mike, who's
I wasn't even born here.
Wasn't born here, but also grew up in Indiana, where there's not a diversity in people in terms of people of color and
it was where I grew up.
Oh, I guess
in my high school there was, but everywhere around else was
not. Which I think is a very good attention to detail that the film does. And what I was going to say earlier, now that I remember, I think that the film does a really good job in terms of with Killmonger's character of kind of showing like what we were saying earlier, Americans, Blacks versus someone who grew up knowing their history versus someone who
he did
knows their history based on what we've learned here. You know what I mean?
Well, Black Panther, everything he knew was kind of a lie that his dad and Forrest Whitaker's character told him. And Michael B. Jordan's character knew the truth of that his dad was murdered and all this stuff.
Well, but there's also this sense of
culture. I'm talking about cultural history.
Growing up with it versus learning it from afar.
Right.
And Yeah, I understand. So this is obviously not the same thing, but my mom is English, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up with English culture, but when
Yeah.
I go to London to visit my cousins, I'm obviously
you're obviously
American.
not.
Like, it's
Yeah.
and it is this sense of like my version of it is not the
same as
rare
that,
version of
yeah.
it. Yeah, and it becomes this different thing. One of the things that I found really interesting reading about Black Panther is that it introduced ideas to mainstream discourse that I think without this movie, like I read an article in, I think it was Time, which is like a pretty mainstream, I would say, like not particularly intellectual publication, about talking about Afrofuturism and how it relates to Black Panther. And that is a word that I've seen like in relation to like Parliament Funkadelic, for instance, but I don't know a ton about it. So I looked up the definition of it so I'm just going to read this to you. Afrofuturism is a cultural aesthetic philosophy of science and philosophy of history that explores the developing intersection of African and African diaspora in culture and technology. It combines elements of science fiction, historical fiction, fantasy, Afrocentrism, and magical realism with non-Western cosmologies in order to critique the present-day dilemmas of Black people and to interrogate and re-examine historical events. The philosophy of Black Panther already existed.
Right.
But no one ever talks about it.
Right.
And like now we have this movie that like, I mean, Disney owns Marvel, right? And Disney is responsible for putting the word Afrofuturism in Time magazine. Like that's kind of insane.
That's crazy, yeah.
And to
cool
think
though,
about
right?
I think it's awesome. And the
Yeah.
power of the filmmaker, it's almost like the power of the artist to subvert the meaninglessness of the corporation for which he's working is really amazing, I think, in this instance.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting in terms of like the rollout of Black Panther from like when we got the first trailer to like the premiere is so specific, but really interesting. Like the way that the trailer rolls out is like, I think it's Martin Freeman's character telling another character about Wakanda, right? Like, and saying like, oh, and this, that. But it's like one thing that's really big in African culture and history is like oral history, right? Like a lot of it is an oral history. And they kind of use that in the trailer. Like they make it doesn't fit the traditional trailer mold or even a traditional Marvel film mold in the way where it's just like, okay, here's the story and It's told as an oral, like you're giving it an oral history of this Marvel film. And then all the way to the premiere where it's like, everyone's dressed in African garb.
So
that was cool.
Did you see the? Maybe I'm behind on this because I don't read a lot about Marvel movies, but the invitation to the premiere said royal attire requested
Oh, I didn't know that.
on
That's
the
awesome.
the invitation.
cool.
Yeah,
That's cool. Yeah, no, I was just saying like the whole way that they rolled out the film was very specific to African culture. In a way that I think that it's interesting that they brought that to Marvel films. I don't know like the numbers in terms of like worldwide and like what their aim is outside of America, but I think it's really interesting to bring that to like an American audience, one that wouldn't typically see that or wouldn't typically.
I mean, I think
care
this
to see
movie
that?
had like a big worldwide impact because
it made
it made a ton of money, but I
yeah.
also think that. I mean, we were talking about. I honestly don't know if this movie was released in China, but we talked about the poster for Star Wars and how John Boyega was made like super small in it, right? But like, there's a lot of markets in the world where, like I lived in Japan, for instance, and like, I wouldn't say that Japanese people are like explicitly racist against anyone, but like Keanu Reeves, for instance. He's part Hawaiian or something like that, right? Yeah. They have a sense of like, oh, he's part Asian, like we relate to him. And I think that the way that Europe basically has controlled the discourse on Africa and how people understand it has created like such a place that seems so like barbaric and alien that people feel like they can't relate to it. And even in like anime, like, if you, obviously not all anime is like this, but there are like anime series where there are, or manga, which is the printed comic book form, where there are African characters who are like those stereotypes that you see in like cartoons from the 30s. You know what I mean? But it's not because they're trying to be racist, it's because of ignorance.
Right.
And so to have a movie like this that's promoted by a company like Marvel/Disney be in movie theaters in like all of these countries around the world is and here let me read you a quote. So do you guys know Sean King?
Yes.
He's a journalist. Yeah. So he wrote a piece about Black Panther, and the title of the piece was "Black Panther is one of the most important cultural moments in American history." He compares it to Obama becoming president, to Kaepernick, and to the "I Have a Dream" speech. And he said, well, and yeah, I mean, you could debate that all day, but the quote that I think relates to this is, "Wakanda showed us our families in one piece. There's no war on drugs, no mass incarceration, no KKK, no lynching, no racial profiling, no police brutality." But it's like it completely takes Africa and Black people more generally out of the context of the history white people are trying to tell you. It just gives you it as its own thing.
Right.
And I think that's so important for people all around the world to be able to see. And like we can watch Chinese movies and be like, that's just a Chinese movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
Whereas I think that previous to that, like if you were to see, a movie about like there aren't that many African movies that get made, right? So if you're seeing movies about Black people, they're probably American.
Right.
And they're probably not movies that are made by and entirely populated by African Americans or Africans.
Right.
So I just think it's a really important like cultural, I don't know if we want to call it a milestone or like an event or something like that, but I feel
and I like that they didn't try to make the white characters bigger than they needed to be. Like the Martin Freeman character is just like they're what he needs to be, and then that's it. He's not. Yeah, he's the sidekick.
And he knows how to fly. That's
he knows how to fly. That's his sole purpose.
I like Martin
And
Freeman.
I will say too, like we talk about this, like in terms of like Black Panther was good because of the cultural, but the film is also just really good. Like I think the story is a solid story. I think the characters, aside from T'Challa, are solid characters.
Yeah, I mean from like a superhero movie.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Yeah.
And it was, and this is just me being geeky, but I'm like a huge fan of James Bond movies, especially like 60s and 70s ones. And that was one of Ryan Coogler's big influences for this movie.
Interesting.
Especially like the scenes where the sister is showing off her gadgets and stuff like that. He also really loves a French movie called A Prophet, and he talked about that when Creed came out, that he and Michael B. Jordan would watch that movie over and over again when they were making Creed. And I really love that movie too. It's about like a French Arab guy who gets arrested for like some petty crime and goes to jail and becomes like a criminal kingpin in jail.
Interesting.
So that when he gets out, he's like the head dude basically.
What year did that come out?
I think 2009.
Oh, okay.
I think there's an American remake of it in the works, but the director was Jacques Audiard, who did Rust and Bone. You're familiar with that movie? And like Deepon, and his first American movie just came out, The Sister Brothers. Have you heard of that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So he did that. Do we think that's a good place to bring it to a conclusion?
I think
can
so.
I tell my
Tell your story.
my what's his name? What's his name?
Who?
The guy who plays T'Challa, Black Panther.
Ava DuVernay.
Ava DuVernay.
Chadwick
Boseman. Yes. I met him.
What?
And
is he as handsome in real life?
Yes, he's really tall, and
really, how tall is he?
He's like 6'2", 6'3".
Wow,
he's pretty tall. But I met him at the March for Our Lives rally. I was like at the VIP section, and at a rally,
section at a rally.
Of course, it's
an LA thing, right?
But I went up to it with my friend. He was very nice.
Their bottle service.
They were like, I did get a water. Do you guys know who Joshua Jackson is?
Yeah,
he handed me a water bottle.
Really?
Like, are you thirsty? I was like, yes, I am. Thank you. But I met him, and we shook hands, and he wouldn't let my hand go, so we're kind of like together.
You had a little bit of a moment?
Yeah.
Did you get his number? Is that who was texting you earlier?
Yeah, that's why I was like, tell me all the...
Tell him to come to the podcast.
Yeah.
We'll ask him a few questions about the behind the scenes.
Oh, here's one final interesting thing. I'm sorry to mention this, but I read today that there's a Facebook group that tried to like bombard Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb with terrible ratings for Black Panther.
Oh.
And it's the same Facebook group that did the same thing for The Last Jedi. And that some academic did a study and is convinced that it's right. It's like the KGB.
Oh, really?
And that they're trying to undermine America by giving movies bad ratings.
That's funny.
It's just some haters.
Anywho,
Who's gonna hate?
yeah, it's like if you look at the
KGB, then
Facebook group,
KGB.
it's all stuff about like
Dude, KGB would just like start killing people.
So Ryan Coogler, concluding thoughts.
Great. Can't wait to see what he does next.
Go see his movies.
I'm
He
interested
gave an
to
interview
see-
very recently about like the last couple of days about the direction of Black Panther 2,
Oh, really?
Yeah,
which I didn't read.
I am interested to see how many. If I'm correct in that, the Black Panther will be nominated for quite a few Oscars outside
I
of just
am
popular.
Interesting.
Because I really do think Michael B. Jordan will be nominated for Best Supporting. Because obviously he's not the lead. That's
Martin
Chadwick
Freeman
Boseman.
will be
Martin Freeman's not going to
token
get
white
nominated.
person. Is that a new category along with popular
Token white
Oscar?
White savior.
I think he will be nominated.
It's just Brad Pitt every year.
actually-
He'll have like 40 of them in his house.
And I actually wouldn't be surprised to see him win.
Sandra Bullock
To
will
see-
win for
Michael B.
women.
Jordan win for Best Supporting.
Interesting.
I really think
Honestly,
it's
I think
big
this
enough
was
and a good enough movie that he will.
of the Michael B. Jordan performances that I've seen. I think the character's great, but I think this was not his best.
And it probably-
there were a couple
yeah.
of lines where I felt like he phoned it. Like I still think he'll get nominated and could probably win, but there were definitely a couple of lines where I felt like he was just like phoning it in.
Yeah.
To me,
Maybe he was literally phoning it. It was like an ADR thing. He was like on the phone. Yeah.
like, is this your king?
It was like eating popcorn at home.
Anything else, or
I mean,
Loved it.
yeah, like I said before, I just think it's really interesting to be watching someone's career who very obviously sees movies for their cultural importance beyond, like he chooses projects based on something that means something more than just a movie.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really interesting. And I think we could use a lot more filmmakers like that.
makes you jealous. 'Cause I wish that was me.
Because he's 3 years younger than me, and I'm sitting in this boiling room doing a podcast.
How old is he?
He's
my age,
32.
32.
32. Oh god.
So
Yeah, dating myself a
Yeah.
little bit, but yeah. Well, thank you for listening. We'll be back one of these days.
yeah, thank you.